The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Cross Mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly between Victoria Sterling and her husband. She sat at the dining table, delicately, cutting her fruit while Damien Cross read the Financial Times, his coffee growing cold as minutes passed in their familiar dance of avoidance. 2 years, 730 days of sharing the same roof, the same last name, the same suffocating silence that had become their marriage. Victoria watched him from beneath her lashes, noting how his dark hair caught the light, how his strong jaw tightened whenever he concentrated on particularly challenging business news. Even in the early morning hours, Damien commanded attention with his presence, the kind of man who could silence a boardroom with a single glance. "I have the Morrison Charity Gala tonight," Victoria said softly, breaking their routine quiet. "The art auction for children's education." Damien looked up from his paper, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers briefly. "I'll have Thomas drive you." His voice carried that same polite distance that had characterized every interaction since their wedding day. "You're not coming?" The question slipped out before Victoria could stop herself. She immediately regretted showing any expectation, any hint that his presence might matter to her. "I have a conference call with Tokyo." Damien folded his paper with mechanical precision. "But if it's important to you?" "No," Victoria said quickly, forcing a smile. "It's fine. I understand." But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Nothing about their arrangement had been fine from the beginning. Victoria remembered the day her world had crumbled, when her family's century-old art gallery faced bankruptcy after her father's poor investments. The Sterling Gallery had been her life, her passion, her identity. When Damien Cross had appeared like a dark angel with his proposal, she'd had no choice but to accept. Marriage to save everything she loved. A contract disguised as romance. The Gallery of Broken Dreams Victoria spent her morning at what remained of the Sterling Gallery, now a small section within Cross Industries' cultural division. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd married to save her gallery, only to watch it become absorbed into her husband's empire. She ran her fingers along the frames of paintings she'd collected over years, each piece telling a story of passion and creativity that her own life seemed to lack. "You're brooding again," Elena Rodriguez observed from the doorway. Victoria's best friend since college entered with 2 cups of coffee, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. Elena had watched Victoria's transformation from a vibrant, independent woman to the polished, distant wife of a CEO. "I'm not brooding," Victoria protested, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I'm contemplating." Same thing, different word. Elena settled into the chair across from Victoria's desk. "When was the last time you and Damien had a real conversation? And I mean real, not about schedules and social obligations." Victoria couldn't remember. Every interaction felt scripted, as if they were actors playing roles in a play neither of them had auditioned for. "We talk." "About what? The weather? His meetings? Your exhibitions?" Elena leaned forward. "Victoria, you're wasting away in that mansion. You used to light up when you talked about art, about life. Now you're like a beautiful statue, perfect and cold." The words stung because they were true. Victoria had become exactly what Damien seemed to want, a decorative wife who enhanced his image without complicating his life. She attended his business functions with a practiced smile, made polite conversation with his associates, and retreated to her own space when the performance was over. "Tonight's the Morrison Gala," Victoria said, changing the subject. "Dr. Hayes will be there with the museum's new acquisition." Elena raised an eyebrow. Oliver Hayes, the charming director of the Metropolitan Museum, had been pursuing Victoria's professional attention for months. His interest seemed to extend beyond her expertise in Renaissance art, though Victoria had carefully maintained professional boundaries. "Will Damien be there?" "Conference call with Tokyo," Victoria replied automatically. "Of course." Elena's expression darkened. You know, for a man who married you, he certainly seems determined to avoid spending time with you. The unspoken desire that evening, Victoria dressed with more care than usual. The deep emerald gown hugged her curves perfectly, and she'd left her auburn hair in loose waves that cascaded over her bare shoulders. As she descended the grand staircase, she caught sight of herself in the antique mirror in the foyer. For a moment, she saw the woman she used to be, confident and radiant. Damien emerged from his study just as Thomas announced the car's arrival. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes traveling slowly from her face to the elegant lines of her dress. Something flickered in his expression, something that made Victoria's pulse quicken. "You look," he began, then seemed to catch himself. "Beautiful, as always." The compliment felt both genuine and carefully controlled, like everything else about their relationship. Victoria felt a familiar ache in her chest, the longing for something real beneath their polite facades. "Thank you," she said simply, though she wanted to ask why he never told her that when it might actually matter. Damien stepped closer, and Victoria caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and masculine that had become associated with safety and distance in equal measure. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, might bridge the gap that seemed to widen between them each day. Instead, he handed her a jewelry box. "I thought you might like to wear these tonight." Inside lay a stunning set of emerald earrings and a matching necklace, clearly chosen to complement her dress. The gesture was thoughtful, yet impersonal, like everything else he did for her. "They're beautiful," Victoria said, meaning it. "Thank you." Damien moved behind her to fasten the necklace, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin at the nape of her neck. The touch was brief, professional, but it sent shivers through Victoria's entire body. She met his eyes in the mirror, seeing something there that made her wonder if the distance between them was as effortless for him as he pretended. The Morrison Charity Gala buzzed with the energy of Los Angeles cultural elite. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, discussing art pieces and philanthropic efforts, while part of her mind remained with the memory of Damien's touch. She'd become skilled at compartmentalizing her emotions, presenting the perfect image while her true feelings remained locked away. "Victoria, you look absolutely radiant," Dr. Oliver Hayes approached with his characteristic warm smile. Tall and distinguished with prematurely silver hair, Oliver possessed the kind of refined attractiveness that appealed to many women. His attention to Victoria had been consistent and patient, waiting for any sign that she might be interested in more than professional collaboration. "Oliver, thank you for organizing such a wonderful exhibition," Victoria replied, gesturing toward the displayed artwork. "The Monet pieces are extraordinary." "Not nearly as extraordinary as the woman viewing them," Oliver said smoothly, moving closer. "I've been hoping we might have dinner soon to discuss the museum's new acquisition program. Your expertise would be invaluable." Victoria felt the familiar discomfort of walking the line between professional networking and personal interest. Oliver's invitations always carried an undercurrent of attraction that she couldn't quite ignore or encourage. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she said carefully. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting next week." "I was thinking of somewhere more intimate," Oliver pressed gently. "There's a lovely restaurant in Malibu with an incredible view of the sunset. Very inspiring for discussing art and other things." Before Victoria could respond, she felt a familiar presence behind her. The subtle shift in the air, the way conversations around them seemed to quiet slightly, told her that Damien had arrived. "Dr. Hayes." Damien's voice carried its usual authority, but Victoria detected something sharper beneath the surface. "I see you're enjoying the exhibition." Oliver turned with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Damien, I thought you had business commitments tonight." "Plans change," Damien replied smoothly. his hand settling possessively on the small of Victoria's back. The touch was light but unmistakably territorial, especially when my wife is involved in such important cultural work. Victoria felt her heart rate accelerate at his unexpected appearance and the subtle claiming in his gesture. She'd grown so accustomed to attending events alone that having Damien beside her felt both thrilling and confusing. Victoria and I were just discussing a potential collaboration, Oliver said, his tone remaining pleasant despite the obvious tension. Her knowledge of Renaissance art would be perfect for our new exhibit. I'm sure it would be, Damien agreed, but his hand remained on Victoria's back, his thumb tracing small circles that she doubted he was even aware of. Victoria's talents are remarkable. The way he said it, with that slight pause and the intensity in his voice, made Victoria wonder if he was talking about more than her professional abilities. She glanced up at him, seeing something in his expression she'd never noticed before, something that looked almost like jealousy. As the evening progressed, Damien remained by Victoria's side with an attentiveness that was entirely new. He engaged in conversations about art with surprising knowledge, deferred to her expertise in front of important collectors, and maintained a subtle but constant physical connection through gentle touches and proximity. Victoria found herself responding to his presence in ways that surprised her. The polite distance she'd maintained began to crack as she watched him interact with their peers, seeing glimpses of the man behind the CEO facade. When he laughed at something she said about a particularly pretentious art critic, the sound sent warmth spreading through her chest. "You seem different tonight," she murmured during a quiet moment between conversations. Damien's gray eyes met hers, and for once, he didn't look away quickly. "Different how?" "Present," Victoria said simply. "Like you actually want to be here." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability that was there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Maybe I'm tired of missing things that matter." Before Victoria could ask what he meant, they were interrupted by the auction beginning. But his words echoed in her mind as they found their seats, Damien's hand helping her settle her dress, his attention focused entirely on her rather than his phone for the first time in recent memory. The evening concluded with Victoria feeling more confused than ever. Damien's behavior had been possessive, attentive, and completely at odds with the distant politeness that had characterized their marriage. As they rode home in comfortable silence, Victoria found herself stealing glances at her husband, wondering what had changed and whether it meant anything beyond a momentary shift in his priorities. When they arrived at the mansion, Damien walked her to her bedroom door, something he'd never done before. They stood in the hallway, the space between them charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. "Thank you for coming tonight," Victoria said softly. "It meant more than you know." Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Victoria," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes?" For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, might finally breach the careful distance they'd maintained. Instead, he reached up to gently remove the emerald necklace, his fingers trailing against her skin with deliberate slowness. "Sleep well," he said simply, but the way he looked at her suggested his own sleep might be elusive. As Victoria closed her bedroom door behind her, she pressed her back against it, her heart racing. Something fundamental had shifted tonight. Some invisible line had been crossed. For the first time since their wedding day, she allowed herself to wonder if their arrangement might become something more. But she had no idea that Damien stood on the other side of her door for several long minutes, his hand pressed against the wood, fighting the urge to knock and finally tell her everything he'd been holding back for 2 long years. Victoria couldn't sleep. The memory of Damien's fingers against her skin, the way he'd looked at her, the possessive warmth of his hand on her back, all swirled through her mind like a fever dream. She'd spent 2 years convinced that their marriage was nothing more than a business transaction, but tonight had shattered that certainty. Rising from her bed, she wrapped a silk robe around herself and padded barefoot to her private study. The room had become her sanctuary, filled with art books, restoration, projects, and the comfortable chaos of creative work. But as she reached for her laptop, her eyes fell on something that shouldn't have been there. A manila envelope sat on her desk, thick and official-looking, with her name written in elegant script. Her heart hammered as she opened it. And what she found inside made her sink into her chair with a gasp. Bank statements, legal documents, transfer receipts, all bearing the Cross Industries letterhead and James Cross's signature. The dates made her stomach turn, each one preceding their engagement by mere weeks. Payments to Sterling Gallery's creditors, personal, loans cleared, her father's mounting debts systematically eliminated, but it was the final document that broke her heart. A contract, clinical and cold, outlining the terms of marriage between Damian Cross and Victoria Sterling. Financial obligations fulfilled in exchange for a socially advantageous union. No mention of love, attraction, or even basic compatibility. Just numbers and signatures and the systematic destruction of her agency. Victoria's hands trembled as she read the clause that made everything clear. Ms. Sterling's consent to marriage arrangement contingent upon complete debt forgiveness for Sterling family assets and businesses. She had never consented to anything. She'd been bought like a painting at auction, and she'd never even known the bidding had taken place. The confrontation dawn was breaking when Victoria heard Damian's morning routine beginning. Usually, she avoided him during these early hours, but today she couldn't wait. She found him in the kitchen, perfectly dressed for another day of meetings, his coffee steaming as he reviewed emails on his tablet. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Damian looked up, immediately sensing the change in her demeanor. "Victoria, what's wrong?" She placed the envelope on the marble countertop between them like evidence in a trial. Were you planning to tell me?" His face went pale as he recognized the documents. For the first time since she'd known him, Damian Cross looked truly shaken. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Did you know? When you proposed, when you slipped that ring on my finger, when you promised to honor and cherish me, did you know that my family's debt had already been paid? That I was walking into a cage I didn't even know existed?" Damian stood slowly, his hands raised as if approaching a wounded animal. "Victoria, please let me explain." "Explain what? That our entire marriage is a lie? That every moment I've spent wondering if you could ever care for me was wasted because you bought me like a piece of property?" Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. "I trusted you, Damian. Even when you were distant, even when you treated me like a stranger, I believed there was something real between us." "There is something real between us," Damian said, urgently, moving closer. Last night was what? Pity? Guilt? A momentary lapse in your professional facade? Victoria backed away from him. "I need to know the truth, all of it, starting with whether you knew about these payments when you proposed." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of 2 years of carefully constructed lies. Finally, Damian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew." The truth unveiled. The admission hit Victoria like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knees threatening to give way beneath her. "You knew," she repeated numbly. "My father arranged everything," Damian continued, his own composure finally cracking. "He presented it as a business opportunity. Your family needed help. I needed a wife who understood the social requirements of my position. He made it sound mutually beneficial." "Mutually beneficial," Victoria laughed bitterly. "I suppose it was, for everyone except me. I was the only one who didn't know the terms of the deal." Damien moved closer, ignoring her defensive posture. Victoria, you have to understand, I was different then. Colder. I'd spent so many years seeing relationships as transactions, emotions as weaknesses to be managed. When my father presented the arrangement, it seemed logical. And now? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Now I understand what I've lost, Damien said softly. What I've been too afraid to reach for. Victoria, I know I can't undo the way this started, but I can tell you that everything changed for me. Not last night, not recently. It's been changing for months, so gradually, I didn't even realize it was happening. Victoria wanted to believe him, but the betrayal cut too deep. How can I trust anything you say? How do I know this isn't just another performance, another role you're playing? To maintain the arrangement? Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw a flash of the commanding CEO who ruled boardrooms with absolute authority. But then his expression softened, vulnerability replacing power. Because I'm going to show you, he said simply. Starting now. The pursuit, what followed, was unlike anything Victoria had experienced in their marriage. Damien seemed to shed his carefully maintained emotional distance like a coat he no longer needed. He canceled meetings to have lunch with her, appeared at the gallery to genuinely learn about her work, and began sharing pieces of himself that he'd kept hidden. I started drawing again, he told her one evening as they walked through the mansion's gardens. For the first time since I was a teenager. What do you draw? Victoria asked, surprised by this revelation. You, he admitted without hesitation. The way you look when you're restoring a painting, completely absorbed in bringing something beautiful back to life. The way you smile when you think no one is watching. The way the light catches your hair when you're reading. Victoria felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Damien, I know you don't trust me, he continued. I know I have, to earn that. But I want you to know that when I look at you now, I don't see an arrangement or a convenience. I see the woman I fell in love with without even realizing it was happening. The word love hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Victoria wanted to believe him, wanted to throw herself into his arms and pretend the past 2 years of distance had never happened. But the hurt ran too deep for easy forgiveness. The business trip. A week later, Damien surprised her with an invitation to accompany him to San Francisco for a series of meetings with potential partners for the cultural division. Your expertise would be invaluable, he said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested business wasn't his only motivation. Victoria almost declined, but Elena convinced her to go. Maybe getting away from all the history in that house will help you see things more clearly, her friend advised. The trip proved to be a revelation. Away from the mansion and its memories, Victoria saw a different side of Damien. He was still commanding in meetings, but he also deferred to her opinions, introduced her as his partner rather than just his wife, and seemed genuinely interested in building something together. Their hotel had given them a suite with connecting rooms, and Victoria found herself appreciating the space while also being hyper-aware of Damien's presence on the other side of the door. On their second night, she heard him moving around restlessly and found herself wondering if he was struggling with the same confusing mix of desire and uncertainty that kept her awake. The breakthrough came during their final meeting with a prestigious museum interested in partnering with Cross Industries for a new contemporary art wing. The director, an intimidating woman in her 60s, grilled Victoria about her vision for the project. Ms. Sterling, your husband's company has the resources, but do you have the passion necessary to make this partnership worthwhile? Victoria felt Damien's attention focus on her, but instead of the performance anxiety she might have expected, she felt his support. When she spoke, it was with the confidence and enthusiasm she'd lost somewhere in the careful politeness of their marriage. Art isn't just about aesthetics or investment value, she said passionately. It's about connection, about seeing ourselves reflected in someone else's vision and understanding that we're not alone in our experiences. The best galleries don't just display art. They create spaces where people can discover parts of themselves they didn't know existed. The director smiled for the first time during the meeting. Now that's what I wanted to hear. As they left the museum, Damien caught Victoria's hand, intertwining their fingers naturally. "That was incredible," he said. "You were incredible." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "It felt good to remember why I love what I do." "I love watching you do it," Damien said softly. "I love seeing you come alive when you talk about art. I love the way you see beauty in everything, even in broken things that other people would throw away." The intensity in his voice made Victoria stop walking. They stood on the sidewalk as people moved around them, the late afternoon sun painting everything in golden light. "Damien," she began, but he stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I know I hurt you," he said. "I know I have to earn your forgiveness, but Victoria, I need you to know that what I feel for you now has nothing to do with contracts or arrangements. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, but you. Your strength, your passion, your incredible capacity for bringing beauty into the world." Victoria felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't born of hurt or anger. "How do I know this isn't just guilt?" "Because guilt doesn't make me want to wake up next to you every morning," Damien said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Guilt doesn't make me want to spend hours listening to you talk about brush techniques and canvas preparation. Guilt doesn't make me want to tear apart anyone who looks at you the way Oliver Hayes does." Despite everything, Victoria smiled at that last admission. "You were jealous." "Insanely," Damien admitted. "The thought of him taking you to dinner, making you laugh, touching you, it made me want to claim you in ways that had nothing to do with marriage contracts and everything, to do with the fact that you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent heat spiraling through Victoria's body. For the first time since their wedding night, she allowed herself to truly look at her husband as a man rather than an obligation. The sharp angles of his face, the way his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the powerful build beneath, the intensity in his gray eyes that promised things she'd only dreamed about. "Damien," she whispered, and this time his name sounded different on her lips. "Say it again," he requested, his voice rough with want. "Damien," she repeated, and then he was kissing her. It wasn't the polite kiss they'd shared at their wedding or the careful pecks on the cheek at public events. This was claiming, consuming, 2 years of careful distance exploding into desperate need. Victoria melted into him, her hands fisting, in his shirt, as he backed her against the wall of a small boutique, his body shielding her from the street. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victoria saw something in Damien's eyes that made her feel beautiful and desired for the first time in their marriage. "Come back to the hotel with me," he said against her lips. "Not because you have to, not because it's expected, but because you want to." Victoria looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability beneath the desire, the man who was finally asking instead of assuming. The hurt was still there, the betrayal still stung, but stronger than both was the love she'd been trying so hard to deny. "Yes," she whispered, and felt something fundamental shift between them as they made their way back to where their real marriage could finally begin. The elevator ride to their floor was charged with anticipation and nervous energy. Victoria's heart pounded as she watched the numbers climb, hyper-aware of Damien's presence beside her, of the way his hand rested possessively on the small of her back. When the doors opened, he guided her down the hallway with gentle pressure, his other hand already reaching for the key card. Their suite felt different now. No longer just a business accommodation, but a space where everything between them was about to change. Damien closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his gray eyes dark with desire but also patient, giving her space to change her mind. "Victoria," he said softly, "if you're not ready—" She silenced him by stepping closer, her hands coming up to frame his face. "I've been ready for 2 years," she admitted. "I just didn't know if you'd ever want me as more than a beautiful accessory." Damien's hands settled on her waist, his touch reverent. "I want you so much it terrifies me," he confessed. "I've wanted you since our wedding night, but I was too afraid of ruining the careful balance we'd found. Too afraid you'd reject me if I showed you how much I needed you." "I thought you found me boring," Victoria laughed shakily. "Convenient, but forgettable." "Forgettable?" Damien's voice was incredulous. "Victoria, you're the only thing I think about. The only thing that matters. When I'm in meetings, I'm wondering what you're working on. When I travel, I'm counting the hours until I can come home to you. When I lie in my bed at night, I'm imagining what it would be like to have you in my arms." His words sent heat spiraling through her body, and she rose on her tiptoes to kiss him again. This time, he responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her and lifting her against him. She could feel his strength, the careful control he maintained even as passion threatened to overwhelm them both. "Show me," she whispered against his lips. "Show me how much you want me." The consummation. What followed was a revelation. Damien worshipped her body with a reverence that spoke of months of imagining this moment, his hands and mouth exploring every inch of her skin as if he were memorizing her. When he finally made love to her, it was with a passion and tenderness that erased every doubt she'd harbored about his feelings. Victoria had expected their physical connection to be as polite and careful as the rest of their relationship. But instead, she discovered a man who was generous and demanding in equal measure, who whispered her name like a prayer and touched her like she was something precious and sacred. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the hotel room's luxurious bed, Victoria's head on Damien's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with satisfaction and new understanding. "I love you," Damien said quietly, the words rumbling through his chest. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you have every reason not to believe me, but I needed you to know." Victoria lifted her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability and hope in his expression. "I love you too," she admitted. "I think I have for longer than I wanted to acknowledge." The smile that spread across Damien's face was unlike any she'd seen from him before, boyish and unguarded. He pulled her up for another kiss, this one soft and sweet, a promise of everything they could build together. The return. Their flight back to Los Angeles was markedly different from their departure. They sat close together, fingers intertwined, speaking in low voices about their hopes for the future. Victoria felt as if she were seeing Damien clearly for the first time, not the cold CEO she'd married, but the passionate, complex man who'd been hiding beneath that facade. But their bubble of happiness was burst the moment they walked into the Cross mansion. James Cross was waiting in the foyer, his expression thunderous as he took in their obvious intimacy. "So," the elder Cross said coldly, "I see the arrangement has become complicated." Victoria felt Damien tense beside her, his hand tightening protectively around hers. "Father, Victoria and I need to discuss some changes to our living situation." "Changes?" James's laugh was harsh. "Son, let me remind you of the terms of your agreement. This marriage serves a purpose, and that purpose doesn't include messy emotional entanglements." "The marriage serves my happiness," Damien replied firmly. "And Victoria's. Nothing else matters." James's gaze shifted to Victoria, cold and calculating. "Ms. Sterling, I trust you understand that your family's continued financial stability depends on maintaining the status quo." The threat was clear, and Victoria felt her newfound confidence falter. But before she could respond, Damien stepped forward, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "Father, you will not threaten my wife. Not now, not ever. The Sterling family's debts were paid in full 2 years ago. Victoria owes you nothing, and neither do I." "You forget yourself, Damien," James warned. "I built this company, this family's reputation. I can destroy both just as easily." "Then try," Damien challenged. "But you'll find that I'm no longer the obedient son who follows your orders without question. Victoria is my wife, my partner, and my choice. If you can't accept that, then perhaps it's time you retired from active involvement in both the company and my life." The battle for control, what followed, was a week of corporate warfare as James Cross attempted to undermine his son's position within the company. He called emergency board meetings, questioned Damien's recent decisions, and tried to rally support among the older directors who remembered when business marriages were common and love was considered a luxury. But Damien had spent years building his own network of allies, and his vision for Cross Industries' future resonated with younger board members who saw the value in his cultural initiatives. More importantly, Victoria's expertise and passion for the arts division had already begun to show impressive returns on investment. Victoria found herself caught in the middle of a battle she'd never wanted to fight. Elena urged her to stand strong, while part of her wondered if walking away might be the easier path for everyone involved. The decision was made for her when Oliver Hayes appeared at the gallery one afternoon with an offer that seemed too good to be true. "The Metropolitan is prepared to offer you a full directorship," he said, his manner professional but his eyes warm with personal interest. "Complete autonomy, unlimited budget for acquisitions, and," he paused meaningfully, "freedom from any complicated personal entanglements." Victoria stared at him, recognizing the escape route he was offering: a prestigious position, financial independence, and distance from the Cross family drama. It was everything she might have wanted before she'd discovered what real love felt like. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Oliver replied, "but don't wait too long. Some opportunities don't come around twice." The choice. That evening, Victoria found Damien in his study, surrounded by legal documents and financial reports as he fought to maintain control of his own company. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up despite the stress lines around his eyes. "How was your day?" he asked, setting aside his work to give her his full attention. Victoria hesitated, knowing that telling him about Oliver's offer would only add to his burdens. But they'd promised each other honesty, and she refused to start their real marriage with secrets. "Oliver offered me a position at the Metropolitan," she said simply. "Director of Acquisitions. It's everything I ever wanted professionally." Damien went very still, his expression carefully neutral. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is," Victoria agreed, moving closer to his desk. He made it clear that taking the position would mean leaving Los Angeles, leaving Cross Industries, leaving you. "And what did you tell him?" Victoria could hear the forced calm in his voice, see the tension in his shoulders as he prepared for her to choose the safer path. Instead, she walked around his desk and settled onto his lap, her arms winding around his neck. "I told him I needed time to think," she said, watching his face carefully. "Time to consider whether I want to run away from the best thing that's ever happened to me just because it came wrapped in complications." Hope flickered in Damien's eyes. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I've spent enough of my life letting other people make my choices for me," Victoria said firmly. "Your father bought my family's freedom, yes, but he didn't buy me. And he certainly didn't buy my love. That's something I'm giving freely, to the man who sees me as more than just a beautiful accessory or a business opportunity." Damien's arms tightened around her. "Victoria, are you sure? My father won't make this easy. The board battle could drag on for months. Your life will be scrutinized, questioned." "Let them scrutinize," Victoria interrupted. "Let them question. I know who I am, and I know what I want. I want you, Damien Cross. Not your money, not your status, not the security you can provide. Just you. The kiss he gave her was fierce and grateful, full of relief and renewed passion. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily. I love you, he said against her lips. God, Victoria, I love you so much. I love you too, she replied. Now, let's figure out how to save your company so we can build our life together. The resolution, the final confrontation came during a board meeting that would determine the future leadership of Cross Industries. James had called for a vote of no confidence in his son, believing he had enough support among the older directors to force Damien out. But he'd underestimated both his son's political acumen and Victoria's impact on the company's cultural division. When the votes were tallied, Damien retained control by a narrow but decisive margin. Gentlemen, Damien said as the meeting concluded, I want to thank you for your continued confidence in my leadership. I also want to announce that immediately Victoria Cross will be taking over as Director of Cultural Affairs with full authority to expand our arts initiatives. James Cross stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. You'll regret this, son. Both of you. Maybe, Damien replied calmly. But I'd rather face regret with the woman I love than spend another day living up to someone else's expectations of who I should be. As the board members filed out, James paused at the door. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Victoria said quietly, her hand in Damien's. We're not children you can manipulate anymore. We're adults who are choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to build something beautiful together. James left without another word, and Victoria knew they'd won more than just a corporate battle. They'd won the right to define their own marriage, their own future. Victoria stood in the main gallery of the newly renovated Cross Cultural Center, watching as guests mingled among the carefully curated collection of contemporary and classical art. The opening night was a tremendous success, with collectors, critics, and art lovers alike praising the innovative approach to cultural programming. Proud of yourself? Damien asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. Proud of us, Victoria corrected, accepting the glass gratefully. This was our vision, our work. Your vision, Damien insisted. I just provided the resources and tried to stay out of your way. Victoria laughed, remembering how involved he'd actually been in every decision, how his business acumen had perfectly complemented her artistic expertise. You did a little more than that. They stood together, watching their guests enjoy the fruits of their labor, and Victoria marveled at how much had changed. Their marriage was no longer a polite arrangement, but a passionate partnership built on love, trust, and mutual respect. I have something for you, Damien said suddenly, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Victoria's breath caught. Damien, before you panic, he said with a smile, it's not what you think. Or maybe it is, but not in the way you're expecting. He opened the box to reveal not an engagement ring, but a delicate gold band set with tiny diamonds that sparkled like stars. Victoria Sterling Cross, will you marry me? Victoria stared at him in confusion. We're already married. We had a contract, Damien corrected gently. We performed a ceremony that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with obligation. I want to marry you for real this time. I want to stand before our friends and family and promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you because I choose to, not because anyone expects me to. Tears blurred Victoria's vision as she understood what he was offering. A real beginning, free from the shadows of their arranged start. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Again. For real. This time. Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, and as he kissed her in the middle of their gallery, surrounded by beauty they'd created together, Victoria knew that some love stories were worth fighting for, worth rebuilding from broken foundations, into something stronger and more beautiful than anything that had come before. Their guests applauded, thinking they were witnessing a simple romantic gesture. But Victoria and Damien knew better. They were witnessing the birth of a love that had overcome every obstacle to claim its rightful place in the world. And as the evening continued around them, neither could imagine wanting to be anywhere else but in each other's arms, ready to face whatever challenges and joys their future might hold together.